had 2 kids, boy and girl. And so to Nederland, Texas, where he would be a minister. So he got this all arranged. The cars came to pick up his wife and children to take them to Moscow, where they would get on a plane and fly to the United States and to Texas. So the car came to take them. Then a second car came to take him. That second car turned out to be full of the KGB. And they ran him down. They didn't just run him down with the car. They ran over his body again and again to make sure he was completely dead. When they got the body to the Tbilisi hospital, he was pronounced dead on arrival and put into a freezer vault.
Oh, my God.
And that's what they do in Tbilisi. They put you right away into a freezer vault. Now, it is certainly true that nobody knows what the temperature of that freezer vault was. We have no way of finding out. But they put him in a freezer vault, and he was there for 3 days. So we're talking day and night, 3 days. During that time, he had one of the longest, and I think one of the most incredible near-death experiences I've ever heard. And among the things that happened to him were later verified.
Seriously verified, like by clinicians, medical people?
Yes. And let me give you 2 of them, 2 of the things that happened.
And when you're done with this example, I do want to go back to the other guy who was in the morgue and woke up and found his ring on his finger. But go ahead with this.
Okay, there were 2 things that I checked, or that I could check. And one of them was, let me just build a little bit more on the story. George was very well known, very political. So they had to do an autopsy.
We're talking about the one that was in the...
We're talking about George Rodenaya. So on the 3rd day, they pull out the drawer, and they take him out of the freezer vault. And they put him on the autopsy table. There's a team of doctors that are cutting him up. They were doing the T-cut. The top bar of the T is the lower abdomen, and then the stem of the T goes up the middle of the body up to the throat. So they had done the lower part of the T. They were in the process of going up the middle of his body, cutting him open, when his eyes opened. Now that's not unusual. That can be an automatic response. So they just simply closed his eyes and kept cutting. His eyes opened again, and again. They didn't think anything of it. They closed his eyes and kept cutting. On the 3rd time he opened his eyes, that was unheard of. And they knew then that he was coming back to life. And the head of the autopsy, one of his own uncles, was a physician on that autopsy team. The chief physician screamed and stepped back and had to take a 1-month leave of absence. He couldn't continue.
I would have to, too.
So they sewed the guy up, and he had to have lots of surgeries. I don't know how many months. I've forgotten how many months he was in the hospital. Lots and lots of surgeries to rebuild him. Almost every bone in his body had been broken. So he was in bad shape. But one of the first things he talked about when he could talk, because when you die, your tongue swells up in the mouth cavity. So you can't talk, can't eat, can't do nothing until that tongue shrinks back down to normal size. And it took 3 days before his tongue could shrink back down. And then he could talk. And he said to the physicians, because among the things that happened when he was out of his body in the different scenarios, he was in the birthing section of the hospital because his friend's wife was a about to give birth, so he went over there to see if she delivered. And she did. She had a little boy. And that little boy was dropped by the head nurse onto the floor and broke his pelvis. And he was screaming and crying and screaming and crying because of the pain of the nurse dropping him. So one of the things that George did while he was out of body, he went over there, he saw what was happening and why, and nobody else had noticed the nurse and what she did. Nobody was x-raying the kid. Nobody was doing anything. So he told the little baby to shut up. He said, children and animals can see spirits. And he said that little kid could see. He said, shut up. I'm going to get you some help. And so as soon as he could talk, he told those physicians, get up there and x-ray this child. Now, bear in mind that George was a physician. So he knew what he was talking about. He described the break of the pelvis exactly. And he told why, that the nurse had dropped the child. So they went up and they x-rayed this child. And the hip was broken exactly as George had described.
How fascinating.
And they confronted the head nurse. And she admitted it.
Oh, that's wild.
The second thing I was able to verify with George's wife, Nino. And that is while he was out of body. She was at the gravesite in the cemetery, picking out graves, picking out the gravesite. And she was standing there at the gravesite. And in her mind, she was going over a list of the various men that would be her next husband. I mean, she was a widow. She had 2 kids to raise, and she wanted to remarry. So she had this list of the different men that she would consider, and she was going over their various qualities, whether or not she really wanted to marry that guy or not. So when they got together again, she was at the hospital, he told her everything that she was thinking about as she was standing in front of the gravesite. He named all of the men and all of the qualities that she was listing in her mind. Now, bear in mind, she never told anybody. This was a mental process. And she was so shocked that she wouldn't have anything to do with George for a year.
Wow.
And I asked her, why not? I mean, weren't you happy to see him back? And she said, how would you like to live with someone when you have no privacy?
Yeah, but he was in the spirit world at that point.
It didn't matter. After that, he continued to be able to read people's minds. He could see inside people's minds. Remember the after effects?
Oh, that's right.
The after effects. And this continued. And it completely freaked her out. And it took her a year before she could get accustomed to it. So those are both very valid.
Wow.
We have lots of valid cases.
Should we go back to the other George?
You had a question about George Ritchie, the American.
Yeah, was that George Ritchie who came back and located the ring on his finger?
Yeah, that was George Ritchie that recognized his class ring on the finger that was hanging below the white sheet. And that's how he knew which body to go back to. Otherwise, he would not have known, and he would not have been able to come back.
So what happened when he came back into his body in the morgue, laying on the table with a sheet over him?
Well, of course, there just happened, don't you love the way this goes? There just happened to be an orderly walking by in the hall, and the autopsy room, the door just happened to be open. I love this kind of stuff, and so the orderly noticed that the sheet was wiggling. Well, a corpse doesn't wiggle. And so he went screaming for a doctor. And the doctor came back and discovered that, yes, George was coming back to life. He gave him a shot in the chest area and then, wheeled him into the surgical room